Never thought a Friday afternoon in March would split my life into before and after. My son had a meet that day, the regional swim qualifiers, and he'd been training for it since September. 6 months of 5 a.m. practices, of chlorine-soaked car rides, of him talking about nothing else at dinner. So when I pulled into the aquatic center parking lot and saw him sitting on the curb outside, still in his street clothes, bag between his feet, I knew something was wrong before I even rolled down the window. He didn't say anything when he got in, just clicked his seatbelt and stared straight ahead. I gave him a minute. Sometimes kids need a minute. We got to the highway before he spoke. Dad, can we just drive for a while? Not home yet. I merged left and kept going. Sure, buddy, wherever you want. Another mile passed. Did you even swim today? I asked. No. You want to tell me why? He turned and looked out the side window. He was 9 years old, and his jaw was doing that tight thing it did when he was trying not to cry. I'd seen it at his grandfather's funeral 2 years ago. I hadn't seen it at his grandfather's funeral 2 years ago. I hadn't seen it since. Coach Briley told me I wasn't ready, he said finally. That I'd embarrass myself if I competed. I kept my hands on the wheel. He said that to you directly. In his office. After warm-ups. He called me in and told me to sit out. Okay. I chose my next words carefully. How did he say it? My son was quiet for a moment. Then he said, like he meant it, like it was just a fact. I took the exit toward the park by the reservoir, pulled into the empty lot and cut the engine. Neither of us moved for a second. Can I see something? He asked. His voice had gone very small. He reached down and pulled up the left side of his shirt. There was a bruise along his ribs, yellowish green at the edges, maybe 4 inches long. The kind of bruise that was already a week old. The air went out of my lungs. Where did that come from? He pulled his shirt back down. Coach grabs us sometimes. When our form is wrong, he says it's a correction. He grabbed me during the butterfly drill last weekend. He stopped. He said if I told anyone, he'd tell the league I was cheating, that I'd get banned from competition. He said nobody would believe a kid over a coach with 15 years of wins. Everything in me went very still. The kind of still that comes right before something breaks. I didn't yell. I didn't reach for my phone. I looked at my son and I said, you did exactly the right thing telling me. I need you to know that. Whatever happens next, you did not do anything wrong. He finally let the tears come. One at a time, quietly. The way boys his age try to cry when they're embarrassed about crying. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his head the way I used to when he was small enough to fit in the crook of my arm. We're going to handle this. But first we're going to go see a doctor, okay? Not because something's terribly wrong. Because I need a record of what I just saw. He wiped his face with his sleeve. Everyone likes Coach Briley, Dad. He took 3 kids to nationals. The other parents. They're going to think I'm making it up. I don't care what they think right now. I care about you. Millbrook Urgent Care was nearly empty at 5 on a Friday. The doctor who saw us was a quiet man named Dr. Aldous Fenn, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The kind of doctor who writes everything down before he says a word. He examined the bruise without drama, asked my son 3 times in 3 different ways how it had happened, the way you do when you're making sure the story doesn't change. Then he asked me to step into the hallway. That bruise is consistent with a grip injury from someone significantly stronger than the child, he said, keeping his voice level. The angle and the depth suggest the force came from adult fingers. I'm going to document this in detail, and I'm going to recommend you contact Child Protective Services today, not Monday. Today. The person he's describing is his swim coach. He's been coaching at Millbrook Aquatic Quad for 15 years. Dr. Fenn looked at me over his glasses. Then you need to understand that the longer this stays informal, the more time there is for stories to get coordinated. Get it on record tonight. I filed the CPS report from the parking lot while my son ate a granola bar in the passenger seat. The woman on the phone was professional, took down everything I said without editorializing. She told me a caseworker would contact me within 24 hours. She told me to keep my son away from the coach in the meantime. That part, at least, I could do. My wife had been at her mother's place in Asheville for the week. When I called her, she answered on the second ring, and I told her everything straight through without stopping. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. I'm leaving tonight, she said. Drive safe. Take your time. I'm leaving right now, Garrett. She was home by midnight. She went to our son's room first and sat with him for 40 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. She'd always been steadier than me in a crisis, which is one of the reasons I'd married her. "What do we know about Briley?" she asked. "Not enough yet." "Then let's start learning." "I'm an accountant. I work with spreadsheets, audit trails, patterns, and numbers that don't add up. That's how my brain works. I look for the thing that's slightly off, the line item that's a fraction of a percent outside the expected range." I sat down at the kitchen table that night with my laptop, and I started treating this the way I'd treat a financial discrepancy. Systematically, without emotion, as much as I could manage. Coach Wade Briley, 51 years old. Head coach at Millbrook Aquatic Club for 16 years. Regional championship coach 7 times. Had a feature in the local paper 18 months ago about his mentorship philosophy. Had a youth coaching award from the county athletics board 4 years ago. I dug deeper. There was a post on a regional swim parent forum from 2.5 years ago. Anonymous. "Has anyone else noticed that Coach B at Millbrook has different rules for certain kids? My daughter started pulling away from the sport this year, and won't say why, but she flinches when I mention practice. We switched clubs, and she's been a different kid since." The responses were mostly dismissive. Some coaches are tough, that's the sport. If your kid can't handle pressure, competitive swimming isn't for them. 2 people had liked the original post and said nothing. I kept searching. 14 months ago, a family had filed a complaint with Millbrook Aquatic Club's board about aggressive physical coaching methods. The club's response, which I found in a cached version of their member newsletter, was a single paragraph stating that the complaint had been reviewed internally and Coach Briley had been cleared, and that the club remained committed to high standards of athlete development. The family had left the club. Their daughter had stopped competing entirely. She was 12. By 3 a.m., I had 4 pages of notes. I got up and made coffee I wasn't going to drink and stood at the kitchen window looking at nothing. My son was 9. He'd been swimming since he was 5. He woke up at 4:53 mornings a week without being asked because he loved it. And somewhere in the last several weeks, a man who should have been protecting that love had decided my son was something to control instead. The CPS caseworker, a woman named Ms. Aldred, called the next morning at 9. She was matter-of-fact and thorough, asked questions I hadn't thought to ask, and told me the investigation would take 30 to 45 days. She also said Briley would likely be notified. "What happens in the meantime?" I asked. "He continues coaching," she said, "unless the club chooses to take independent action." I called the club's board chairman that afternoon. His name was Hector Pennington, and he'd been chairman for 11 years, which meant he'd been chairman for almost the entirety of Briley's tenure. "Mr. Pennington, my son was physically grabbed during practice hard enough to bruise his ribs. I have medical documentation. I filed a CPS report. And I found evidence of a previous complaint that was handled internally and never disclosed to the membership." There was a pause. "Coach Briley is one of the finest youth coaches in the state. Your son isn't the first kid to have a difficult relationship with a demanding coaching style." "That's not what this is. I think we should let the investigation run its course before." "Before what? Before he does this to another kid this week?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have the board look into it." He hung up. Briley kept coaching. I called a lawyer friend of mine that evening, not to sue anyone, not yet, but because I needed to understand what I was allowed to do without putting myself in a worse position. She listened to everything and then she said, "You have medical documentation, a prior complaint, and a CPS report. That's a real foundation. What you don't have yet is pattern evidence. Other families willing to go on record. How do I get that without starting a panic? Carefully. One conversation at a time." Over the next 2 weeks, I reached out to 8 families whose kids had trained under Briley in the past 3 years. I was careful about how I framed it. I wasn't making accusations. I was asking if anyone had noticed changes in their kids they couldn't explain. I expected to get doors closed in my face. What I got instead was something that made me feel sick and relieved at the same time. A father named Dwight told me his son had started wetting the bed again at age 10, something he hadn't done since kindergarten. The boy said he didn't know why. He'd quit the team 6 months ago, citing burnout. He never went near the pool anymore. A mother named Claudette told me her daughter had started having panic attacks on Sunday evenings, not on school mornings. Sunday evenings, reliably, like clockwork. the night before Monday practice. She'd thought it was performance anxiety. She'd put the girl in therapy. The therapist had asked some careful questions, and the girl had eventually said she didn't like how Coach touched her shoulders when he corrected her stroke. The therapist had flagged it. The family hadn't known what to do with that information. They'd transferred clubs quietly and told no one. A couple named the Abercrombies told me their son had started refusing to go into the locker room alone. He was 8. He said he didn't like the way Coach walked through when the older boys were changing. They'd thought he was going through a shy phase. I documented everything. Names, dates, what each family told me, verbatim as best I could write it. I kept it in a password-protected folder on my laptop and a printed copy in a locked box in my car. The Millbrook Aquatic Club's annual member meeting was in 3 weeks. It was open to all current and past families. A public comment period was on the agenda. My wife and I talked about it for 2 nights straight. Going public meant no more quiet investigation. It meant Briley would know we were coming. It meant people in the community who loved and trusted him would be angry. It meant our son's name might get out despite our efforts to protect him. It meant we'd be the family that blew up a championship program with no guarantee anyone would believe us. But it also meant that other parents would finally hear what we'd heard, and it meant that whatever happened next, it would happen in the open where it couldn't be quietly filed away. We decided to go. I spent the week before the meeting organizing everything into a packet. The medical report, doctor report, fence documentation, the prior complaint I'd found, the notes from my conversations with the other families, with their permission, the forum post, the club's dismissive newsletter response. My lawyer friend read through everything and helped me strip out anything that was opinion rather than fact. Stick to what you can prove, she said. Let the pattern speak. The night of the meeting, the community room at the aquatic center was packed. I recognized faces from years of swim meets and parent volunteer shifts and fundraising barbecues. Briley was there in the front row in a club polo shirt, arms crossed, calm. He had the kind of face that trusted institutions build over decades. Square jaw, direct eye contact, an easy smile for anyone who caught his eye. I sat in the third row with my wife beside me and a folder on my lap, and my heart going at about twice its normal speed. When the public comment period opened, I stood up. My name is Garrett Holloway. I've had a son in this club for 4 years, and I'm here tonight because what happened to my son 3 weeks ago can't be allowed to happen to another child in this program. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when people realize they're about to hear something they don't want to hear. I didn't accuse, I described. I walked through exactly what my son had told me, what Dr. Fenn had documented, what the CPS report contained, what the prior complaint said, and how it had been handled. I held up the folder. I told the board that copies were available for each of them. I told them I was not there to destroy a program. I was there because the program had already been damaged by the person running it, and the people responsible for oversight had chosen not to see it. Briley uncrossed his arms. "This is a misunderstanding," he said from his seat, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had never been seriously questioned in a public room. The child had a difficult week. He was frustrated about the qualifier lineup. What this man is describing as an injury is how I correct butterfly stroke mechanics. It's a standard coaching technique. Standard coaching technique, I repeated. That leaves bruises on a 9-year-old's ribs. I've been coaching for 16 years, and there was a complaint 14 months ago that your board buried. Hector Pennington started to speak. He was cut off by Dwight, who stood up in the middle of the room. His voice was unsteady, but he didn't sit back down. He said his son's name, said what had changed in the boy, said what the boy had finally told him 2 days ago when Dwight had shown him the medical photos I'd shared with the other families. Then Claudette stood up. Then the Abercrombies. One by one, 5 families stood and spoke. Not all of them had definitive incidents. Some had only changes in behavior they couldn't explain. But the pattern, laid out in that room by real people with real names, was impossible to dismiss the way a single anonymous forum post could be dismissed. Briley's expression had changed. The ease was gone. He looked at the board and then at the room, and then at nothing in particular. The board voted that night to place Briley on administrative suspension, pending an independent investigation. It wasn't enough. It wasn't what I wanted, but it meant he was away from the kids while the investigation ran. What happened after that moved faster than I expected. The CPS investigation, combined with the public meeting and the families who were now willing to go on record, prompted the county sheriff's department to open a criminal inquiry. A detective named Sergeant Okafor called me the following week. She was thorough and careful, and she asked me not to contact any more families until her office had spoken with them directly. I agreed. 3 weeks later, 2 more families came forward independently, families I hadn't spoken to. A girl who'd aged out of the program 2 years ago, now 11, told her parents something she'd been holding for 18 months. Another family had transferred clubs 18 months prior and only heard about the investigation through a mutual friend. Their son had never said anything directly. When his parents sat down with the detective, he finally did. The search of Briley's office turned up a notebook. The detective didn't tell me everything that was in it. She told me enough. It was a log of individual athletes, notes on their home situations, their confidence levels, which ones had parents who were frequently absent from meets, which ones were coachable, which ones were resistant. The language was clinical, almost administrative. The kind of record-keeping you do when you're selecting. Wade Briley was arrested on a Wednesday morning. The charges included multiple counts of child abuse, with additional counts added as more victims came forward through the investigation. The final count was 11 children over a period of 9 years. 9 years. He'd been doing this since before my son was born, since before some of his victims were born. I sat with that for a long time. Still do. Hector Pennington resigned from the board. 2 other board members who had signed off on the prior complaint's dismissal resigned under pressure. The club hired an outside firm to review all of their safety protocols. They implemented a policy requiring 2 adults to be present during any individual coaching session. They established an anonymous reporting channel for athletes and families. They hired an independent child safety advocate to review their procedures annually. It wasn't enough to undo 9 years, but it was something. My son started seeing a therapist named Dr. Whitmore, who works specifically with young athletes dealing with coaching-related trauma. The first month was hard. He didn't want to talk about swimming at all. He'd built his identity around that sport since he was 5 years old, and now the whole thing was contaminated by what had happened inside it. But Dr. Whitmore is patient, and my son is stubborn, which has always been one of his better qualities. By spring, he was back in the water. Different club, different coach. A woman named Miss Farrow, who has a policy of open-door sessions and whose kids clearly love her. He still gets quiet sometimes before practice, but he goes, and slowly, week by week, I've watched him start to love it again. He's 10 now. He made his first regional qualifier time last month. He texted me from the pool deck. "Did it, Dad?" 2 words. I had to pull over on the way to pick him up because I couldn't see straight. There are things I know now that I didn't know before any of this happened. The first is that abusers in youth sports count on the sport itself as a shield. The physical contact is built in. The authority is built in. The culture of tough coaching provides cover for years of harm, because parents have been taught that discomfort means growth, and that questioning a winning coach means you don't understand the sport. I didn't understand any of that before my son pulled up his shirt in the car. The second is that the kids who get targeted are rarely the ones who are the most vulnerable by accident. Briley's notebook made it clear. He was looking for kids whose parents worked long hours, kids who wanted approval, kids who would interpret his attention as a privilege rather than a threat. He was methodical about it. That methodical quality is part of why he lasted 9 years. The third is that when your child tells you something is wrong, the most important thing you can do is not fix your face into whatever expression you think will make them feel safe. Just let your face do what it does. My son needed to see that what he was telling me was actually affecting me. Not that I was falling apart, but that I was taking it seriously. Children who are being harmed have often been told so many times that their experience isn't real. The most powerful thing you can say is simply, "I believe you." The fourth is that going to official channels and going public are not in conflict. I did both. The official channels needed the public pressure to move. The public couldn't act on anything until there was documented evidence behind it. They worked together. And the last thing I know, the one I come back to most often, is that my son shouldn't have had to be the one to start this. He was 9 years old, and he was terrified, and he did it anyway. Every other child who was hurt before him was also terrified. Some of them are teenagers now. Some of them stopped swimming. Some of them are still working through what happened with therapists and parents who, for a long time, didn't know what to work through. My son asked me last fall, sitting in the car after practice, the same car the same seat, the same stretch of highway where this all started. He asked me if I thought the other kids were going to be okay. I said I thought they were going to get there, that getting okay from something like that takes time, but it's possible. He looked out the window. I'm glad I said something, he said, even though it was really scary. Me too, buddy. Every single day. Me too. Because he was 9 years old, and he chose truth over fear. And because he did, 11 families finally had a name to put to something they've been carrying alone. 11 families who could now say, someone believed us, someone fought. If you have a child in any kind of youth program, I want you to watch for the thing I missed for longer than I should have. Not just the bruises. I almost didn't even know to look for those. Watch for the Sunday night stomach aches. Watch for the kid who used to run to practice and now needs to be dragged. Watch for the flinching when a coach's name comes up in conversation. Watch for the child who has inexplicably stopped talking about the thing they used to talk about constantly. And if they come to you with something, if they sit in a passenger seat and ask you to just drive for a while, let them take their time, and when they finally say what they need to say, before you do anything else, before you call anyone or plan anything or try to fix it, believe them first. Everything else comes after that. I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the investigation, not the arrest, not the policy changes of the club. I mean, what made the very first moment possible. My son sitting in that passenger seat, watching the highway, working up the courage to say something he'd been holding alone for weeks. What made that happen? I think it comes down to something I didn't consciously teach him. I just tried to be the kind of father who showed up, to the early practices, to the meets that mattered and the ones that didn't, to the drives home when he was tired and didn't want to talk. I was just there. And somewhere in all that showing up, he decided I was someone he could bring the hard thing to. That's the cause. The effect was that 11 children got justice they might never have gotten otherwise. One kid's decision to speak, made possible by years of ordinary presence, rippled outward into 9 families who had been carrying something silently and alone. That's how it actually works, I think, not in dramatic moments, in the accumulation of small ones. What Briley did lasted 9 years because he was intelligent about it in the worst possible way. He didn't pick kids at random. He studied them. He identified the ones who wanted approval more than they wanted safety, the ones whose parents were stretched thin and distracted, the ones who had been taught that a coach's authority was sacred and that physical discomfort was the price of becoming great. He weaponized the culture of the sport itself, all the things that make competitive athletics genuinely good, the discipline, the trust, the hierarchy of experience, and he used them as cover. That kind of predatory intelligence doesn't get defeated by innocence alone. It gets defeated by adults who are paying attention. By parents who notice the Sunday night stomach aches and ask the second and third question. By teachers and coaches and board members who choose discomfort over institutional loyalty. By the Dwights and Claudettes who, when someone finally gave them permission to speak, did. My son showed me something I hadn't known I was missing. Not just the bruise, though that changed everything, but the fact that courage in a 9-year-old looks exactly like fear. He was shaking when he lifted his shirt. His voice was barely above a whisper. He told me anyway. That's not the absence of fear. That's fear with a decision made on top of it. I've tried to carry that forward into how I move through the world now. When something feels wrong, I try not to wait until I have certainty. Certainty is a luxury that doesn't always come. What comes instead is a quiet sense that something is off, and a choice about whether to follow that sense or let it get swallowed by comfort and convenience, and not wanting to be the person who makes things complicated. I choose to follow it now. Every time. Briley is in a cell. The club has new safeguards. 11 families know the name of what happened to their children. My son made his regional qualifier time and texted me 2 words from the pool deck. My wife, who drove through the night the moment I called her, still tears up sometimes when she watches him race. None of that happens without a scared 9-year-old choosing truth over silence in the front seat of a car on a Friday afternoon in March. That's the whole story, and it's enough.